Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have your life stripped away just because you love a little too fiercely? Willa Harper, a 72-year-old black woman with a heart full of stories, stands trembling in a cold courtroom, her world unraveling. The social worker, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Kline, brands Willa's conversations with her cat, Midnight, as delusions demanding her involuntary admission to a psychiatric hospital. The air is thick with judgment, the sting of isolation cutting deep as Willa clutches Midnight's worn collar, her only family. Society overlooks her, sees a lonely old woman, not the strength that's carried her through decades of hardship. But there's a spark in Willa's eyes, a quiet promise of defiance. A reversal is brewing, one that will shake this courtroom and challenge the system's cold grip. How are you all doing today? Feeling strong and ready to root for Willa? Let's dive into her fight, a story of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her cat, proving no one's too old or too alone to demand justice. The courtroom in downtown Oakland was a cavern of polished wood and flickering fluorescent lights, its high ceilings swallowing the soft murmurs of those gathered. Willa Harper sat at the defendant's table, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing oak chair. At 72, her face bore the lines of a life well-lived, laughter etched around her eyes, sorrow carved into her brow. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her hands, calloused from years of tending gardens and mending clothes, fidgeted with the frayed collar of Midnight, her tabby cat. The collar was all she had left of him today. The social worker had forbidden her from bringing that animal to court. Willa's heart ached at the thought of Midnight alone in her tiny apartment, his green eyes searching for her. Outside, the late autumn sun cast a golden glow over the city, but inside the air was stale heavy with the weight of judgment. The gallery held a smattering of people, a few curious onlookers, a bored reporter scribbling notes, and Margaret Kline, the social worker, sitting ramrod straight in her crisp gray suit. Margaret's blonde hair was pulled into a severe ponytail, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. At 45, she prided herself on her efficiency, her ability to protect the vulnerable, though Willa saw it as control, not care. Margaret had been assigned to Willa's case after a neighbor's complaint about that old lady talking to her cat like it's human. To Margaret, it was a clear case of mental instability, a danger to society that needed to be locked away. Willa's apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a weathered building on the edge of town, was her sanctuary. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, her late husband James grinning in his army uniform, her daughter Lena, who'd passed from cancer a decade ago, and Midnight sprawled across her lap like a king. The place smelled of lavender and old books with crocheted blankets draped over every chair. It was here that Willa and Midnight had built their quiet life, a rhythm of shared silences and gentle routines. She'd talk to him about her day, her dreams, her fears, and he'd listen, his steady purr a balm for her soul. To Willa, Midnight wasn't just a pet, he was her confidant, her reason to keep going. But the world outside her door didn't see it that way. Oakland had changed since Willa was a girl. The neighborhood, once vibrant with black families who knew each other's names, was now a mix of new condos and old resentments. Gentrification had pushed out many of her friends, leaving Willa feeling like a stranger in her own home. Her neighbors, mostly younger and white, kept their distance, their smiles polite but fleeting. The complaint that landed her here came from a man upstairs, a tech worker who'd overheard Willa through the thin walls chuckling to Midnight about the stars they'd watch from her fire escape. "She's unhinged," he'd told Margaret, and that was enough to set this nightmare in motion. Margaret had visited Willa's apartment 3 weeks ago, her clipboard in hand, her questions sharp and probing. "Do you believe your cat understands you, Ms. Harper?" she'd asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Willa had laughed a warm, throaty sound and said, "Of course he does." "Don't your pets know when you're sad?" Margaret's lips had thinned and she'd scribbled furiously, her pen carving Willa's fate. The next day, a court order arrived, summoning Willa to defend her sanity, her freedom, her life with Midnight. Now in the courtroom, Willa felt the walls closing in. The judge, a white man in his 60s named Harold Grayson, peered over his glasses, his face a mask of weary authority. His robe hung heavy on his shoulders, and his voice carried the gravel of too many years on the bench. He'd seen cases like this before, elderly folks, often minorities, deemed unfit by a system that valued efficiency over empathy. But Willa wasn't just another case. She sat straighter, her dark eyes meeting his, a silent plea for him to see her really see her. The prosecutor, a young white man named Daniel Walsh, stood to present Margaret's report. His suit was tailored, his hair slicked back, his confidence unshakable. Ms. Harper exhibits clear signs of delusions. He began, his voice smooth and practiced. She engages in prolonged conversations with her cat, attributing human-like understanding to it. She lives alone, has no family, and refuses community support. This isolation poses a risk to her safety and others. Willa's stomach twisted. No family she had Midnight. Refused support, she'd never been offered any that didn't feel like a cage. Margaret nodded along, her expression smug. She'd built a career on cases like this, her reports rarely questioned. To her, Willa was a statistic, an old black woman who didn't fit the mold of stable. Margaret didn't see the garden. Willa tended the meals she cooked for neighbors, the way she'd sit on her stoop and wave at kids passing by. She didn't see the strength it took to survive loss after loss, James to a heart attack, Lena to illness, and still find joy in a cat's quiet company. As Daniel droned on, Willa's mind drifted to Midnight. She pictured him curled on her armchair, his black and gray fur catching the sunlight. He'd been with her through the darkest days after Lena's death, when depression had nearly swallowed her whole. Midnight would nudge her hand, demanding attention, pulling her back to the present. He'd saved her in ways no human could. And now, they wanted to take him away to lock her in a sterile hospital where no one would listen. The courtroom clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of how fragile her freedom was. Willa's lawyer, a kind but overworked public defender named Sarah Coleman, scribbled notes beside her. Sarah, a black woman in her 30s, understood the stakes. She'd seen the system chew up people like Willa, dismissing their humanity under the guise of care. She leaned over and whispered, "We'll fight this, Willa. You're not alone." Willa nodded, but her heart pounded. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Midnight, for their life together, for every overlooked soul told they didn't matter. The scene was set, the players in place. Willa, the overlooked warrior, faced Margaret, the gatekeeper of a system blind to her worth. The courtroom was a battleground, and the fight was just beginning. But Willa felt a flicker of hope, a sense that something or someone would shift the tide. She didn't know how, but she clung to it as tightly as she clung to Midnight's collar. The courtroom's air grew thicker as the hearing pressed on the tension, coiling like a spring ready to snap. Willa Harper sat rigidly, her hands gripping Midnight's collar, its worn leather grounding her against the storm of accusations. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished wood of the bench where Judge Harold Grayson presided. His face, lined with years of routine rulings, betrayed no hint of what he thought, but his occasional glance at Willa carried a flicker of curiosity, or was it pity? She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Margaret Kline, the social worker, took the stand, her gray suit pristine, her posture radiating authority. Her voice was clipped clinical as she addressed the court. "Ms. Harper's behavior is concerning." She began flipping open her notepad. She engages in daily conversations with her cat, treating it as a sentient being. She's isolated with no family or support network, and her refusal to accept assistance suggests a lack of insight into her condition. Margaret's pale blue eyes flicked toward Willa, not with malice, but with the cold detachment of someone who saw her as a problem to be solved. This level of delusion, combined with her age and living alone, poses a clear risk to her safety. Willa's chest tightened. Delusion. She wanted to stand and shout that Midnight was her lifeline, that his quiet presence had pulled her through grief no human could touch. But her lawyer, Sarah Coleman, placed a gentle hand on her arm, whispering, "Stay calm. We'll get our chance." Sarah's dark eyes burned with determination, but Willa saw the strain in her furrowed brow. Sarah was fighting an uphill battle against a system that rarely questioned reports like Margaret's. The prosecutor, Daniel Walsh, leaned forward, his slicked back hair catching the light as he pressed Margaret for details. "Can you elaborate on Ms. Harper's living conditions and interactions?" he asked, his tone smooth, almost theatrical. Margaret nodded, eager to comply. Her apartment is cluttered, filled with sentimental items, photographs, old blankets, cat toys. She spends most of her time indoors, rarely socializing. Neighbors report hearing her talk to the cat at all hours, sometimes laughing or crying. One described it as unnerving. Willa's face burned. Cluttered her home was a tapestry of memories, each item a thread in the story of her life. The neighbor's complaint stung deepest. A young man who'd never bothered to knock on her door, never asked her name yet, felt entitled to judge her through the walls. She thought of the time she'd left cookies on his doorstep, hoping to bridge the gap, only to find them untouched. Now his words were being used to cage her. Sarah stood to cross-examine, her voice steady but sharp. "Miss Kline, did you observe Miss Harper harming herself or others?" Margaret hesitated, her lips pursing. "No, but her isolation and fixation on the cat suggest potential for self-neglect." Sarah pushed back. Did you offer her community resources like senior programs or counseling before recommending hospitalization? Margaret's eyes narrowed. I provided a list of services, but she refused. Willa shook her head slightly. Margaret had handed her a pamphlet and left no discussion, no warmth. The conflict escalated as Daniel called a psychiatrist, Dr. Lawrence Bennett, a white man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a patronizing smile. He'd evaluated Willa once a brief 20-minute meeting arranged by Margaret. Ms. Harper exhibits signs of delusional disorder, he testified, adjusting his glasses. Her belief that her cat communicates with her is a classic symptom. Given her age and lack of social support, I recommend involuntary admission for further assessment. Willa's heart sank. She remembered that. Meeting Dr. Bennett barely looked at her. His questions rushed his pen scratching before she could finish speaking. Sarah challenged him, her voice rising. Dr. Bennett, did you consider that Ms. Harper's conversations with her cat might be a coping mechanism, not a delusion? Many people talk to their pets. Dr. Bennett's smile tightened. Not to this extent. Her attachment is excessive unhealthy. Sarah pressed, did you assess her daily functioning, her ability to manage her home, her finances? Dr. Bennett faltered. I relied on Ms. Kline's report for that. A murmur rippled through the gallery, and Willa felt a spark of hope. Sarah was exposing the cracks in their case, but would it be enough? The tension peaked as Judge Grayson leaned forward, his gravelly voice cutting through the room. Ms. Harper, do you have anything to say? Willa's breath caught. Sarah nodded encouragingly, and Willa stood her knees, trembling but her voice steady. Your Honor, Midnight ain't just a cat. He's my family. After my husband and daughter passed, he gave me a reason to get up every day. I talk to him because he listens, and that don't make me crazy, it makes me human. I ain't hurting nobody. All I want is to live my life with him in my home. The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air. Judge Grayson's expression softened, but only for a moment. Ms. Harper, I hear you, he said, but the court must consider your safety. Living alone with no one to look after you raises concerns? Willa's heart plummeted. No one to look after her. She'd looked after herself for decades through loss and hardship with Midnight by her side, but to the court, she was just an old woman, her strength invisible. Margaret's smug nod from the gallery fueled Willa's anger. This wasn't just about her, it was about every elderly person, every black person dismissed by a system that saw them as less. She thought of her mother who'd faced similar battles and her grandmother who'd taught her to stand tall. She wouldn't let them win, not without a fight. As the hearing adjourned for a brief recess, Sarah pulled Willa aside. We're not done yet, she said, her voice fierce. I've got to lead a therapist who works with animal-assisted therapy. She might have evidence to turn this around. Willa's eyes widened, hope flickering anew. The conflict was at its peak, the stakes higher than ever. Margaret and the system held the upper hand, but Willa felt the tide shifting, a quiet strength rising within her. She wouldn't go down without a fight, and neither would Midnight. The courtroom doors swung open after the recess, and Willa Harper felt the weight of every eye in the room. The air was charged, the earlier tension now a taut wire ready to snap. She sat at the defendant's table, her hands still clutching Midnight's collar, its familiar texture a lifeline. Her heart pounded, but Sarah Coleman's whispered words during the break echoed in her mind. We've got something, Willa. Hold on. Sarah's dark eyes had sparkled with a fierce hope, and Willa clung to it even as doubt gnawed at her. Could anything sway Judge Grayson, who'd already called her a danger to herself for living alone? The gallery was fuller now, word of Willa's case spreading through the courthouse. A few elderly black women from her neighborhood had slipped in their presence, a quiet show of solidarity. They nodded at Willa, their faces etched with the same resilience she carried. Margaret Kline, the social worker, sat in her usual spot, her blonde ponytail as severe as her expression. She tapped her pen against her notepad, confident that her report would seal Willa's fate. The prosecutor, Daniel Walsh, leaned back in his chair, his tailored suit crisp, his smirk barely concealed. To them this was routine, a quick ruling, another case closed. But Sarah had other plans. She stood, her voice clear and commanding. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Elaine Carter, a licensed therapist specializing in animal-assisted therapy, to present new evidence. A murmur rippled through through the room. Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow, adjusting his glasses. Proceed, Miss Coleman, but this better be relevant. Willa's breath hitched. Dr. Carter. She'd never met this woman, but Sarah's confidence was infectious. Dr. Elaine Carter, a black woman in her late 40s, strode to the witness stand. Her warm brown eyes and calm demeanor contrasted with the courtroom's sterile chill. She wore a navy blazer and a scarf patterned with tiny paw prints, a subtle nod to her work. Sarah approached holding a USB drive. Dr. Carter. Can you explain your expertise and the evidence you've brought today? Elaine nodded, her voice steady but warm, like a teacher addressing a curious class. I've spent 20 years studying the therapeutic benefits of animals, particularly for older adults and those with mental health challenges, Elaine began. My research focuses on how animals like cats can reduce depression, anxiety, and even detect physical health changes. I was contacted by Ms. Coleman about Ms. Harper's case, and I've prepared a video presentation that demonstrates the profound impact of her cat Midnight on her well-being. Margaret shifted in her seat, her pen pausing. Daniel leaned forward, his smirk fading. Willa's heart raced. This was the lead Sarah had mentioned. Judge Grayson nodded. Let's see it, but keep it brief. A court clerk set up a small screen and Elaine inserted the USB drive. The lights dimmed slightly and the video began. The screen flickered to life, showing Willa's apartment bathed in soft morning light. There was Willa sitting on her worn armchair, Midnight curled in her lap. The footage, recorded by a community volunteer who'd visited Willa months ago, captured her talking softly to Midnight. You know, baby, today's a tough one. Miss Lena's birthday. Her voice cracked, but Midnight nudged her hand, purring loudly. Willa smiled, stroking his fur, her shoulders relaxing. The scene shifted to Willa laughing as Midnight chased a feather toy, her joy infectious. A voiceover from Elaine explained, "This interaction shows how Midnight helps Ms. Harper process grief-reducing symptoms of depression without medication." The video then cut to a medical segment. A cardiologist, Dr. Sanjay Patel, appeared on screen, his white coat crisp. I examined Ms. Harper after her cat exhibited unusual behavior, persistent nudging and vocalizing. Midnight detected subtle changes in her breathing, which led us to diagnose early-stage heart disease. She's now on medication and her condition is stable. The footage showed Midnight pressing his head against Willa's chest, his eyes alert. Elaine's voiceover added, "Cats like Midnight can sense physiological changes, acting as early warning systems." Willa's eyes widened, tears prickling. She remembered those moments, Midnight's insistence, his soft meows, waking her at night. She'd thought he was just being fussy, but he'd saved her life. The gallery stirred, the elderly women whispering excitedly. Margaret's face tightened, her pen now still. Daniel scribbled notes, his confidence shaken. Elaine continued, addressing the court directly. Ms. Harper's bond with Midnight isn't delusional, it's therapeutic. My research, backed by peer-reviewed studies, shows that animal companionship reduces loneliness and improves mental health in seniors. Midnight provides emotional stability and physical monitoring functions no human caregiver could replicate 24/7. Locking Ms. Harper away would sever this bond, likely worsening her health. Sarah seized the moment. Your Honor, this evidence proves Ms. Harper isn't a danger, she's thriving because of Midnight. Hospitalization would harm her, not help. Daniel stood to object, his voice sharp. This is anecdotal, Your Honor. A cat can't replace proper medical care. But Sarah countered, Dr. Patel's diagnosis wasn't anecdotal. Midnight's role is documented, measurable. Ms. Kline's report ignored this, relying on biased assumptions about Ms. Harper's age and race. Judge Grayson leaned back, his fingers steepled. Ms. Coleman, you're suggesting Ms. Kline's assessment was flawed? Sarah nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It dismissed Ms. Harper's strengths and cultural context, labeling her bond with Midnight as pathology without evidence. The room fell silent, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. Willa felt a surge of pride. Sarah was fighting not just for her, but for every black elder misjudged by a system that didn't understand them. Elaine stepped down, leaving the video's impact lingering. The turning point had arrived, the narrative shifting from Willa as a deluded old woman to a resilient survivor supported by a remarkable cat. Margaret's smugness faltered, her eyes darting to Daniel for reassurance. The elderly women in the gallery sat taller, their nods a silent cheer. Willa's hope burned brighter, but the battle wasn't won. Judge Grayson's next words would decide her fate, and she braced herself, Midnight's collar warm in her hands. The courtroom pulsed with anticipation, the air electric, as Judge Harold Grayson's gavel rested on the bench, his eyes scanning the room. Willa Harper sat at the defendant's table, her heart hammering so loudly she feared it might drown out the proceedings. Midnight's collar, worn soft by years of love, was clutched tightly in her hands, its faint jingle a reminder of the stakes. The video presented by Dr. Elaine Carter had shifted the room's energy, cracking the foundation of Margaret Kline's case, but the battle was far from over. Willa's freedom hung in the balance, and every word now carried the weight of her future. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. Ms. Coleman, you've presented compelling evidence about Ms. Harper's cat, but the court's primary concern is her safety given her age and solitary living situation. Do you have anything further to address this? His tone was measured, but his earlier comment calling Willa a danger to herself for having no one else to live with loomed large. Willa's stomach churned. She'd lived alone for years, managing her home, her bills, her life. Why was that suddenly a crime? Sarah Coleman stood her posture, radiating determination. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Harper's independence is a strength, not a liability. We have additional testimony to demonstrate that she's not only capable, but thriving thanks to her bond with Midnight. She turned to the clerk. Please call Mrs. Dorothy Ellis to the stand. Willa's eyes widened. Dorothy, her neighbor from 2 doors down, was one of the elderly black women who'd slipped into the gallery earlier. Willa hadn't known Sarah had contacted her. Dorothy, a spry 68-year-old with a crown of tight silver curls, walked to the stand with a quiet dignity. Her floral dress swayed slightly and her warm brown eyes met Willa's, offering a reassuring nod. Sarah approached, her voice steady. Mrs. Ellis, can you describe your relationship with Ms. Harper and her role in the community? Dorothy smiled, her voice rich with the cadence of their shared Oakland roots. Willa's been my neighbor for 20 years. She's the heart of our building. She tends the community garden, shares her vegetables, checks on us when we're sick. That cat of hers, Midnight. He's always with her, calming her when things get heavy. She ain't alone. She's got us. Willa's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much her small acts of kindness had meant. Dorothy continued. After my husband passed, Willa brought me soup every week, sat with me, let Midnight curl up on my lap. She's not just surviving, she's lifting us all up. The gallery stirred, the other elderly women nodding vigorously. Margaret Kline shifted uncomfortably, her pen idle. Daniel Walsh's jaw tightened, his earlier confidence eroding. Sarah pressed forward. Mrs. Ellis, has Ms. Harper ever seemed unstable or unsafe? Dorothy's laugh was sharp, almost defiant. Unstable Willa's the steadiest person I know. She's got her routines, her garden, her cat. If talking to Midnight's a crime lock me up too, I chat with my parakeet every day. A chuckle rippled through through the room, even Judge Grayson's lips twitching. Willa felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't as invisible as she'd feared. Sarah turned to the judge. Your Honor, Ms. Harper has a community, a support system Margaret Kline's report failed to acknowledge. Her bond with Midnight enhances her stability, as Dr. Carter's evidence shows. Involuntary hospitalization would disrupt this, causing harm rather than preventing it. She paused, her voice rising with conviction. We also submit that Ms. Kline's assessment was biased, overlooking Ms. Harper's strengths due to her age, and race, a pattern we see too often in cases involving elderly black women. The courtroom fell silent, Sarah's accusation landing like a thunderclap. Margaret's face flushed, her eyes darting to Daniel for support. He stood, his voice sharp. Objection, Your Honor. That's speculative and irrelevant. But Sarah held her ground. It's entirely relevant. Ms. Kline's report ignored Ms. Harper's community ties and medical evidence, relying on stereotypes about elderly minorities living alone. We request an investigation into her conduct. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Willa's heart soared. Sarah was going for broke. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Ms. Coleman, that's a serious allegation. Do you have evidence of bias? Sarah nodded, producing a folder. We have affidavits from 3 other seniors in Ms. Harper's building, all black, who report similar dismissive treatment from Ms. Kline. Her reports consistently recommend institutionalization over community-based solutions for minority clients. She handed the folder to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Margaret's composure cracked, her hands clenching her notepad. The climax peaked as Judge Grayson reviewed the affidavits, his brow furrowing. He set the papers down, his voice deliberate. Miss Harper, I've heard the evidence. Your cat's role is unconventional, but the medical and community testimony is compelling. However, the court must ensure your safety. I'm inclined to rule against hospitalization, but I need assurance you're not at risk. Willa stood, her voice trembling but clear. Your Honor, I've lost my husband, my daughter, but I've never lost myself. Midnight keeps me strong, and my neighbors keep me grounded. I don't need a hospital. I need my home. The room held its breath. Judge Grayson's eyes softened, a flicker of respect breaking through his stern facade. Very well, he said, his gavel hovering. I'm dismissing the petition for involuntary admission. Miss Harper, you're free to return home with your cat. A cheer erupted from the gallery, Dorothy and the other women clapping wildly. Willa's knees buckled, Sarah catching her with a grin. We did it, Sarah whispered. But Grayson wasn't done. Ms. Kline, I'm referring your conduct to the Department of Social Services for review. This court won't tolerate biased assessments." Margaret's face paled, her notepad slipping to the floor. Daniel slumped in his chair and defeated. Willa's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of triumph. The system had tried to break her, but she'd stood tall with Midnight's love and her community's strength behind her. The gavel fell, sealing her victory, and the courtroom erupted in applause. The courtroom doors swung open, releasing Willa Harper into a world that felt both familiar and forever changed. The late afternoon sun bathed Oakland in a warm golden hue, softening the edges of the city's concrete sprawl. Willa stepped onto the courthouse steps, her worn sneakers scuffing against the stone Midnight's collar still clutched in her hand. Beside her, Sarah Coleman walked with a triumphant stride, her briefcase swinging lightly. The cheers of the elderly women from the gallery, Dorothy Ellis and her crew, followed them, their voices a chorus of joy that echoed in Willa's heart. She was free, her life with Midnight intact, but the weight of the fight lingered, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. Willa's first stop was her apartment, a modest haven on the edge of town. The building's faded brick facade greeted her like an old friend, its cracks and peeling paint a map of her history. She climbed the narrow stairs, her knees protesting, but her spirit soaring. When she opened her door, Midnight was there, his black and gray fur gleaming in a patch of sunlight. He meowed a low, insistent sound and bounded toward her, rubbing against her legs. Willa dropped to her knees, tears streaming as she scooped him up. "We made it, baby," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. His purr vibrated through her, a melody of survival. The apartment was just as she'd left it, lavender-scented, cluttered with love. The crocheted blankets, the faded photos of James and Lena, the tiny pots of herbs on the windowsill. It all felt sacred now, a testament to her resilience. She settled into her armchair, Midnight curling in her lap, and let the silence wrap around them. For the first time in weeks, she breathed easy, the fear of a sterile hospital room fading like a bad dream, but the victory was bittersweet. The system had tried to erase her, to dismiss her bond with Midnight as madness. She'd won, but others might not be so lucky. Sarah had stayed for a cup of tea, her presence a quiet anchor. "Willa, you're stronger than most," she said, sipping from a chipped mug, "but this isn't just about you. We've started something. Margaret's under investigation, and that could change things for a lot of folks." Willa nodded, her eyes on Midnight. "I just wanted to live my life," she said softly. "But if this helps others, then it's worth it." Sarah smiled, promising to keep her updated, then left to file paperwork for the investigation into Margaret Kline's conduct. The next morning, Willa woke to a knock at her door. It was Dorothy, her silver curls bouncing as she held out a plate of homemade cornbread. "You're a hero, Willa Harper," she said, her grin wide. Behind her stood two other neighbors, Miss Clara and Miss Evelyn, their faces beaming. They crowded into the apartment, filling it with laughter and stories. Clara, a wiry 70-year-old, patted Midnight's head. "This cat's a miracle worker. My sister's got a dog that knows when her sugar's low." Evelyn, round-cheeked and 65, nodded. "We're starting a petition to get more support for seniors with pets." You and Willa's heart swelled. "Count me in," she said, her voice firm. The community's embrace was a balm, but Willa felt a new purpose stirring. She'd always been the quiet helper, tending the garden, sharing meals, but now she saw herself differently. She was a fighter, a voice for those the system overlooked. Over the next few days, her apartment became a hub of activity. Neighbors dropped by with ideas, reporters called for interviews, and even the young tech worker from upstairs. The one who'd complained stopped by to apologize. "I didn't understand," he mumbled, eyes downcast. Willa handed him a cookie and said, "You do now. That's enough." He left with a shy smile, and Willa felt a spark of hope for the neighborhood's future. Dr. Elaine Carter visited too, bringing a certificate that made Willa's jaw drop. Midnight's been recognized as a medical-grade psychological support animal. Elaine said, her paw print scarf catching the light. "This means he's protected under new local guidelines, and you can access resources for his care." Willa stared at the certificate, Midnight's name in bold letters. "He's always been my hero," she said, her voice thick. Elaine hugged her, promising to advocate for more seniors to keep their pets. "You've opened doors, Willa," she said. "This is just the start." As the days passed, Willa returned to her routines, but they felt richer now. She tended her garden, Midnight sunning himself nearby, and waved at kids on their way to school. She joined Dorothy's petition, speaking at a community meeting about the healing power of pets. Her voice, once hesitant, grew stronger, each word a tribute to Midnight and the neighbors who'd stood by her. The investigation into Margaret Kline gained traction, with news reports citing systemic bias in her cases. Willa didn't gloat. She pitied Margaret, trapped in a mindset that saw people like her as problems, not people. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Willa sat on her fire escape with Midnight, the stars just beginning to peek through the city's haze. She talked to him, as always, about the day, the fight, the future. "We're gonna keep going, you and me," she said, scratching his ears. His green eyes met hers, steady and knowing, and she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The world had tried to break them, but they'd emerged stronger, surrounded by a community that saw them, truly saw them. The opening of Willa's new chapter wasn't just about freedom, it was about possibility. She'd reclaimed her life, but more than that, she'd sparked a movement. The system was creaking, its flaws exposed, and Willa, with Midnight by her side, was ready to push for change. The stars above twinkled, a quiet promise that her fight and her love would light the way. The weeks following Willa Harper's courtroom victory settled over Oakland like a soft autumn breeze carrying whispers of change. Willa's apartment, once a quiet refuge, now hummed with purpose. The lavender-scented air mingled with the aroma of fresh, baked cornbread and brewing coffee as neighbors flowed in and out, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope. Midnight ever. The king of the space lounged on his favorite crocheted blanket, his green eyes tracking the bustle with a contented air. Willa, at 72, felt a shift within her, a spark that hadn't burned so brightly since her youth. The fight for her freedom had cracked open a door, and she was stepping through Midnight by her side. The aftermath of the trial rippled far beyond her apartment's walls. The investigation into Margaret Kline's conduct gained momentum, with local news outlets running stories about systemic bias in social services. Margaret, once a fixture in Oakland's bureaucracy, had been suspended pending review, her crisp gray suits replaced by a low profile. Willa didn't revel in Margaret's downfall. She saw it as a symptom of a larger sickness, a system that too often dismissed the elderly, especially Black elders, as burdens rather than treasures. She prayed Margaret might see people like her differently, but Willa's focus was forward, not back. Her community, though, was alive with possibility. Dorothy Ellis, Clara, and Evelyn had turned their petition into a full-fledged campaign dubbed Pets for Seniors. They met weekly in Willa's living room, papers strewn across her coffee table, Midnight, occasionally batting at stray pens. The campaign aimed to secure funding for pet care programs, ensuring seniors could keep their animals without fear of losing their homes or freedom. Willa, once hesitant to speak up, found her voice at these meetings. "Our pets ain't just animals," she told a small crowd at a community center, her hands steady. "They're family healers sometimes, our only light. Nobody should have to choose between their heart and their home." The room erupted in applause, and Willa felt Lena's spirit smiling down. The recognition of Midnight as a medical-grade psychological support animal opened new doors. Dr. Elaine Carter connected Willa with a local nonprofit that provided free veterinary care and supplies for certified support animals. A young vet named Dr. Mia Torres visited, checking Midnight's heart and teeth, marveling at his alertness. "He's in great shape," Ms. Harper, Mia said, scratching Midnight's chin. "He's got a lot of years left to keep you company." Willa beamed, handing Mia a slice of cornbread. "He's my guardian angel," she said, and Mia nodded, understanding more than words could convey. Willa's story spread touching hearts beyond Oakland. A reporter from a Bay Area newspaper interviewed her, the article's headline reading, "Cat Saves Senior One Woman's Fight Against a Broken System." The piece detailed Midnight's role in detecting Willa's heart condition and easing her depression, framing her as a hero, not a victim. Letters poured in, some from seniors sharing their own pet stories, others from advocates pushing for policy change. One from a retired nurse in Sacramento read, "You've given me hope, Ms. Harper. My dogs kept me going since my stroke. Thank you for fighting." Willa kept every letter, taping them to her fridge, a reminder that her battle had lit a fire for others. Yet reflection brought moments of quiet sorrow. Late at night, when the city hushed and Midnight dozed beside her, Willa thought of those who hadn't won, elders locked away their pets, rehomed, or worse. She remembered her mother, who'd faced similar judgments in the 70s, her strength dismissed as stubbornness. Willa's victory was a beacon, but the system's shadows loomed large. She'd sit on her fire escape staring at the stars and whisper to Midnight, "We gotta keep going, don't we?" His purr was her answer, steady and sure. The neighborhood itself was changing too. The young tech worker who'd complained about Willa's talking to cats became an unlikely ally, joining the Pets for Seniors campaign. His name was Ethan, and he brought tech skills, building a website to spread their message. "I misjudged you," he told Willa one evening, helping her weed the community garden. She patted his arm. "You're here now. That's what matters." Ethan's presence bridged a gap, drawing younger residents into the fold. The garden flourished, its tomatoes and collards, a symbol of roots growing deeper. Willa's health, bolstered by Midnight's vigilance, remained stable. Dr. Sanjay Patel, the cardiologist from the video, checked in monthly, marveling at her resilience. "You and that cat are a team," he said, adjusting her medication. Willa chuckled. "Always have been. Midnight, ever watchful, would nudge her if she skipped a dose, his instincts sharper than any alarm." Willa saw him as more than a support animal. He was her partner, her equal in this dance of survival. As winter approached, Willa stood before a city council meeting, Dorothy and Elaine flanking her. They presented their campaign's proposal backed by hundreds of signatures. Willa spoke less, her voice carrying the weight of her journey. "I almost lost my home, my cat, my life because someone didn't see me. Don't let that happen to others. Our pets save us. Let's save them too." The council approved a pilot program, and the room cheered, Willa's eyes shining with tears of pride. In the quiet moments, Willa reflected on her transformation. She'd been the overlooked widow, the crazy cat lady, but now she was a leader, a voice for the voiceless. Midnight had been her anchor, but her community had lifted her wings. The echoes of her fight would carry on in policy changes in lives, touched in a system forced to look harder at those it had ignored. As she stroked Midnight's fur, the stars above her fire escape brighter than ever. Willa knew this wasn't the end, it was a beginning for her, for Midnight, for all who dared to love fiercely in a world that didn't always understand. Willa Harper's story is more than a tale of one woman and her cat. It's a beacon for every heart that's ever felt unseen, every soul told their love doesn't matter. At 72, Willa faced a system that tried to strip her of her home, her freedom, and her beloved Midnight, dismissing their bond as delusion. But with Midnight's quiet strength, her community's fierce support, and her own unyielding spirit, she turned the tide, proving that no one is too old, too black, or too alone to fight for what's right. Her victory echoes in Oakland streets, in policy changes, in lives touched by her courage. Willa and Midnight remind us that love in all its forms is a force that can move mountains. Now it's our turn to carry that torch. Think about the Willas in your life, the elders, the overlooked, the ones whose stories go unheard. Maybe it's your neighbor tending her garden with a dog at her side, or your aunt whose cat curls up with her through lonely nights. Their bonds with their pets aren't just sweet, they're lifelines as vital as any medicine. We can honor them by listening, by seeing their strength, by standing up when the system tries to push them down. So here's the call: get involved. Support campaigns like Pets for Seniors, which fight for elders to keep their animals. Share Willa's story. Tell your friends, your family, your coworkers about the woman who won her freedom with a cat by her side. Comment below with your own stories of pets who've saved you or elders who've inspired you. Like and subscribe to the Black Women channel, where voices like Willa's shine bright, amplifying the resilience and wisdom of our sisters. Every click, every share, every word you spread builds a world where no one has to fight alone. And don't stop there. Reach out to your local senior centers, ask how you can help elders stay connected to their pets. Volunteer, donate, or just sit and listen to someone's story. You might be surprised at the strength you find. Willa's fight started with a single complaint, but it ended with a movement. Your small action could spark the next one. As Willa sits on her fire escape tonight, Midnight purring under the stars, she's not just free. She's a symbol of what's possible when we refuse to be silenced. Let's make sure her light keeps burning for every elder, every pet, every heart that dares to love fiercely. Join the fight, share the love, and let's build a world where everyone's story matters.